The big question on many people's minds, who will be Trump's crypto czar? And what has the creation of such a position meant for the respective industry in the past? What does this mean for Bitcoin? We're going to answer all three of these questions. Let's start with examining the known candidates that are being thrown around right now. Welcome back, everyone. Let's dive into it. The four candidates for the crypto czar. Who could they be? Well, let's start off with the people I believe are just complete FUD and a joke. And the first one that I'm going to start off with is the creator of Cardano, Charles Hoskinson. Now, obviously, this is complete FUD, okay? But due to the comments made by Charles in the video that I'm about to show, ADA supporters couldn't help but pretend that Charles was a possibility for the crypto czar, but make no mistake, this is not happening. I'm sorry, it just isn't. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Anyways, we're going to show the video right now and see how those comments ended up getting, misconstrued into, hey, he's going to be in line as crypto czar.
Second, a large part of my time in 2025 will also be devoted to the political process. I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time working with lawmakers in Washington, D.C., and quite a bit of time working with members of the administration to help foster and facilitate with other key leaders in industry the crypto policy. We have to do this, and we have to get.
Of course, the Charles Hoskinson candidate possibility was just complete FUD. And interestingly enough, this is going to bring us to candidate number 2, because essentially Charles went and put out a X post suggesting that Brian Armstrong be the crypto czar. But really, look, let's be honest, it's not going to be him. I don't really see it. I think that he's obviously not experienced enough. And not that I'm some, judge of what a person has in terms of proper experience or not. I just think he's way too young and running Coinbase. And for whatever reason, my tinfoil hat take is that they've got different plans for Brian Armstrong. Some people would have us believe that there's a good chance that it's somebody like Brian Armstrong with comments in articles like this, right, where they say key figures like Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong have reportedly met with Trump to discuss crypto policy. Charles Hoskinson backed Brian Armstrong as well and said, there's only one candidate that I think stands out in our industry for this role, and that's Brian Armstrong. In another mainstream article, this was suggested that Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong, former acting U.S. comptroller of the currency Brian Brooks, and crypto dad Chris Giancarlo have all emerged as potential candidates. There's also been some really interesting opposition to this. The comments made by Roger Grimes, who's a data defense expert at KnowBe4. So he's saying he's not even sure why a crypto czar is needed. So we're also seeing that it's a bit of a mixed bag, and of course, not everyone agrees. There are other major markets that do not have this position of a czar, right? Like credit default swaps or the real estate industry. So they don't have a specific czar that's in charge of speaking directly with Donald Trump, and those are massive industries that have trillions of dollars in assets, and yet there's nothing there. So it does start to seem like if this is some type of a marketing gimmick. My point is, I just don't see Brian Armstrong being a serious candidate. I understand that mainstream media has posited his name, but I just don't see it. Now, where it gets a little bit interesting, I believe, is these last two candidates. So one of them is this person, Brian Brooks, right? He's a lawyer. He's also a banker. Okay. And he's got a very interesting background at companies like Mulvaney and Myers, Fannie Mae, Coinbase, and Bitfury. So he would seem like a really good fit with a good background. But is that really enough? Which brings me to the fourth candidate I've picked out of the few that have been mentioned. Chris Giancarlo. So Chris has a very interesting work history, but to me, what is of real interest, okay, is this. After the great financial crisis was over, so he testified before Congress for the Dodd-Frank Reform Act. Okay. Now, that may seem like a giant nothing burger, but this was the big financial reform act that was passed after the big mortgage crisis, right, of 2007, 2008. And if you think about it, Chris, right, was on the quote unquote the right side of the fence, right? He was on the side that was saying, hey, we're going to propose this legislation and we're going to fix this, right? We're going to provide regulation that stops this type of thing from happening in the future. So when you think about someone like him, think of the symbolism, right? He was a proponent of the tools that fixed the financial crisis, right? Or made it so that type of failure could not occur again. So in terms of symbolism, right? If you look at the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, right, as industries. So what this does in my eyes is that it creates, again, a virtuous environment where you can trust. Right? Like this is when you look at it from the terms of the institutions, right? When they're sitting there and they're looking at essentially creating all kinds of products for this space, when they see somebody like Chris, who was a strong proponent of the Dodd-Frank Act, well, that gives them confidence. They say, well, we've got, this guy that seems like we can trust him. And he was one of the people that did the right thing, seemingly, in the past. So all of this to say, I believe that it is going to be Chris Giancarlo as the crypto czar to Donald Trump. So what does this really mean for Bitcoin? I mean, look, I've never really cared about all of the legislation, and I understand it. It may just be because I'm naive. It has to do with understanding self-custody and understanding that these people actually have zero power over the Bitcoin network itself. So I guess in my eyes, I'm a little jaded where I'm just like, yeah, you guys can do whatever you want with all your regulation. It doesn't make a difference. But look, to the average person, right, the average person that is maybe not so much of an extremist, so to speak, right, is not so much about Bitcoin's qualities of freedom and censorship resistance. This type of rhetoric and these types of events, right, where somebody like Donald Trump is trying to choose this one focal point, this one person that he can talk to about this crypto space. Look, it's not a bad thing, right? It's not actually a bad thing. And to the average person, what this does is it signals legitimacy. Now, whether or not that is correct is a whole other beast, okay? Because as you guys know my stance, I mean, all shitcoining is just complete vaporware. So there's Bitcoin and there's crypto. It's not just me that says this. There's many other people that have been in the space a lot longer. So I'm not pretending, right, like this is my thing, but I'm just saying, to me, like it's always been that line. Like that is a hard line for me, right? There's Bitcoin and there's crypto. And so for me, all of this regulation and stuff like that, it mostly applies to crypto. In the end, right? The only thing that matters, I think, and again, it depends on what type of Bitcoiner you are, right? If you're the kind of person that has been purchasing all of your Bitcoin through KYC and whatnot, the reality is that if you decide to exchange your Bitcoin for experiences, for land, whatever it is that you decide to do, well, at that point, those regulations may end up helping you. They could end up hurting you too. It depends on what regulations actually pass. But, if the government decides to pass regulation that is favorable for Bitcoin, possibly removing capital gains tax on that, well, all of a sudden, what's interesting? Some people may not really care so much about KYC versus non-KYC corn because in the end, there's quite a few people that really only care about capital gains taxes, and they just don't want to pay those taxes, which is a whole other problem all on its own. Capital gains tax means that you're profitable. Now, of course, you shouldn't be happy about paying the state for absolutely nothing. But I guess that's the small point of solace that we can take. We can sit there and be like, well, at least I was in profit. Anyways, I'm not trying to justify any kind of regulation. That's just nuts. I guess I'm just trying to put lipstick on a pig. But yeah, guys, that's my take. I think it's going to be Chris Giancarlo. I think that it is the virtue, the virtue / trust signaling of his previous history and where he comes from, and the fact that he testified for the Dodd-Frank financial reform, right, which came out of the great financial crisis. I don't think that that's a coincidence, and obviously we'll have to see how all of this plays out. That's all I wanted to talk about. I'll catch you guys on the next one.